letters. Any try to decipher this message? No, you're giving up. It's relatively simple ciphering that we used. Well, you will see in a few minutes, Stefano, that I remember using in the secondary school when we wanted to hide our messages from parents and from teachers, and that's almost there. The yes, Massimiliano, you are on the right track. The message is here. Welcome to webinar on ancient Rome diplomacy, and it is written by one innovation which Roman diplomacy brought to us. It's so-called Julius Caesar cipher. The message was written, as you can see, with just the change position of the alphabet, and it starts with D instead of A, and then you can have a matching letters above. That was invented by Julius Caesar, and he was very enthusiastic in using it and making much more sophisticated. But it is one of the first and major innovations of the Roman diplomacy, extensive use of cipher-protected communication, mainly for military purposes, but later on, as we'll see in Byzantine, also for diplomatic purposes. Now, today we will continue our journey. You remember we started in January with early days of diplomacy. We moved to the ancient East, Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Hittite Empire. Last month we covered the ancient Greece, and today we are in Rome. And I'm sure that since most of you are based in Rome, it is sort of we are coming back home for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll again move towards East, and you will see why we will cover the Roman Empire mainly through the diplomacy in Byzantine time. Now let us answer our typical questions. This is how we are going to proceed today, like we did in past. We'll answer the question when this particular development in diplomacy happened, where, how. At the end, we will try to draw the lessons for our time, what we can learn in this case from the Roman Empire. There are three major periods, and as we already discussed, we are covering these webinars quite wide time periods of a few centuries. Now, as you will see, while we are coming to our age, we will be zooming more and more, and coming in the end toward decades when we will be discussing the impact of the internet on diplomacy. But here we have the three main periods. The first period from 4th till 1st century BC, which could be called the Republic and Punic Wars, where Romans were basically building their empire, and they used diplomacy. They negotiated, and they needed allies, especially during the Punic Wars. The second period in history of diplomacy in the Roman Empire is the period of Roman Empire between 27 BC till the end of the western part of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. This is the period where diplomacy wasn't used a lot. The Roman Empire had overwhelming power. It controlled the Mediterranean and beyond, and it basically didn't need diplomacy. In the sharp contrast to this period, we have a Byzantine Empire, the last, our Eastern Roman Empire, which started from 330 when Constantine established the Constantinople and moved the headquarters from Rome, if we can use today's terminology, headquarters, capital of the empire, till the end in 1453, when Ottoman Empire, Turks, Seljuks basically overran the Constantinople at that time, and rename it into Istanbul. These three periods are important because in the first period we had some use of diplomacy. In the second period during the Roman Empire, there was very limited use of diplomatic tools. And then Byzantine Empire is probably one of the glorious periods of diplomacy in the history of diplomacy. And as you will see during today's webinar, most institutions that we use today were basically conceived and developed in the Byzantine Empire, and later on to Venice, moved to main European governance stream of development of European diplomatic services. This periodization is quite important, and keep in mind one aspect while we are discussing especially Byzantine Empire. It is a temporal aspect. Byzantine Empire was one of the longest lasting empires, definitely in Europe, but even globally. It lasted for 1,100 with relatively unchanged internal organizational and governance structure. And they were masters of using time, delay tactics, procrastination, and that was one of their main advantages in diplomacy. And it's a useful lesson for our times where we have the pressure on immediacy and immediate action and immediate reaction to various activities. Now, the sort of background for our exercise is a calendar, 2013 calendar on evolution in diplomacy. This is the picture for the month of April. On the left-hand side, you have Roman Empire, you have the might and the swords and the enormous power. And on the right-hand side, you have the Byzantine Empire, illustrated by the long negotiation, interaction, treaties, and as you will see, other diplomatic techniques. This is a sort of periodics of the Roman era diplomacy. Now we'll just make a few comments on geographical aspects, which is important for understanding Byzantine diplomacy. Where was it happening? Here is the image of the map of the Roman Empire at its height. It was covering beside the Mediterranean Sea, Mare Nostrum. It was covering also had big possessions in Asia Minor and towards north in Britannia and most of the Europe. That was the sort of the highest point in the Roman Empire. As you will see, the empire started shrinking, and here is how the empire looked at the beginning of the 6th century, 555 Anno Domino, at the time of Justinian, the big ruler of the Byzantine Empire, who, among other things, made the famous Justinian Codex as the most important codification of Roman law. Byzantine Empire already started losing its possessions, and it was more centered around the Mediterranean Sea. Now, this is the end of the Byzantine Empire. As you can see, there are a few possessions next to the Bosphorus, and in Peloponnese they were controlled by Byzantine Empire before 140,053. I'm sorry for the mistake. It's basically Ottoman Empire took control of Constantinople, which later on became Istanbul. Now, this city is extremely important for understanding the dynamics in the Ottoman Empire. As you know, it is based on the magnificent geographical location. Even today, when you walk through Constantinople, you can see the energy and that uniqueness, geographical uniqueness. It is based on the Golden Horn, on the Bosphorus, and the name of the Byzantine Empire originated from the city which ancient Greeks established there. The name of the city was Byzantine, and later on, when Constantinople established his capital, and he followed the habit of Alexander and the others, Alexander had Alexandria, he basically established Constantinople as the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire at the beginning of the 4th century. Therefore, the city was the center of the empire. It was an excellent fortification, and most of the history of the Byzantine Empire centers around the destiny of Constantinople and nowadays Istanbul. Therefore, when you visit Istanbul, try to walk, to make historical walk, and to imagine, to situate you emotionally, cognitively in that great era of the history of Byzantine Empire, which lasted for 1,100 years. Now, this is the setup, the time, different periods, the golden era of the diplomacy in Byzantine Empire, the geography where it happened. What is important just to mention when it comes, before we move to how diplomacy was performed, geography was decisive for the Byzantine diplomacy, because the country, as you will see later on, was open to attacks from almost all directions, from north, where you had the Slavs, Hungarians, Bulgarians, the Germans, from the east of newly emerging Western powers around the Pope and the few powers in the West, and from the Central Asia and East Asia, there were the new nomadic tribes which were attacking the empire. They had traditional enemies, mainly Persian Empire, which after the big losses during the Alexander's time managed to regain the power, and they started threatening the Byzantine Empire's dominance of this world. Therefore, geography is extremely important for understanding why Byzantine used diplomacy so extensively. Now, this is some sort of geostrategical setup in which they had to act. They had to protect huge borders. They had to deal with mainly nomadic tribes on the much lower level of civilizational development than Byzantine Empire, and they had limited resources. They had an army of 140,000 soldiers. It couldn't be compared with the Roman Empire and their might, the might that Roman Empire had. Therefore, they had to use diplomacy. This was a necessity in the case of the Byzantine, and this is the reason why they developed the diplomacy to such extent. It wasn't necessarily trust in the peaceful solution of conflicts or making harmonious world. It was a pure necessity. They lacked the force to control their borders and to maintain the empire. Therefore, diplomacy was the only tool. Now we'll discuss how they managed to develop this unique Byzantine diplomacy. As you can see, they used some sort of eclectic approach, and they combined various techniques that were developed in previous periods. And this is one of the, if I can say, cognitive characteristic of Byzantine Empire. They were quite eclectic and practical people, like Romans. Romans before them, and I would say, inherited that practical approach to solving problems. In this, we can say that it is some sort of mashup diplomacy. If you use nowadays the internet terminology, you know what is mashup, combining blogs, tweets, Facebook, and other tools. They took something from Egypt and Mesopotamia, from the ancient East. They used a lot of dynastic marriages to cement their alliances, especially in 10th and 11th century, when the Byzantine Empire started losing power. They had a very elaborate protocol, and we'll see later on why they used the protocol. They inherited also from Egypt and Mesopotamia. They had some sort of early trade diplomacy by having merchant ambassadors, the same technique that was used in the ancient East. From the ancient Greece, they inherited mainly awareness about the importance of soft power, awareness of winning hearts and minds of their adversaries. It wasn't a difficult task because they had to deal with the nomadic tribes, and it was relatively easy to influence them, at least in the first period of the Byzantine Empire. They used a lot, quite extensive rhetoric, and they try to influence the local public. When we use that nowadays terminology, we have to use it with the necessary care. Public were basically ruling families and circles around the leaders of the nomadic tribes which were surrounding Byzantine Empire. From Rome, they took the principle of managing relations with their enemies by dividing them and ruling the emperor. And they, for example, also inherited one of the first tools for development assistance, as the Romans did with the parts of the neighboring territory. They had some sort of a development assistance project by having a great civil engineering construction work. Therefore, in this way, Byzantine Empire took the pieces from the different diplomatic traditions and creating something new, which is called Byzantine diplomacy. What are the highlights in their diplomatic toolkit? They focused a lot on protocol and ceremonies. They had to impress these nomadic tribes which were around them. They basically developed enormous elaborate protocol ceremonies in Constantinople. They had, for example, a mechanic lion, which was roaring when the dignitaries were coming in front of the emperor. And they had the golden birds which were singing when the foreign dignitaries were coming to approach the emperor. Therefore, they had to develop element of sublime, something almost divine in order to control these nomadic tribes. And they were very successful in using protocol and ceremonies. You will see this trace of the Byzantine influence you can find nowadays, well, not nowadays, but you can find in the 19th or 20th century in big projects in the colonial capitals in Paris, London, other places, impressive buildings. And that was one of the traits of Byzantine diplomacy, but much, much more weaker. They used a lot of soft power to impress barbarians. They tried to avoid wars for the simple reason they didn't have enough troops, and they didn't have resources, and they were aware that if they engage in prolonged wars, that could threaten the very existence of the Byzantine Empire. They were quite skillful in using treaties. They signed many international treaties, and while they were observing the letters of the treaties, they were extremely creative in interpretation of different clauses. Therefore, they managed to find their way around the treaties, although they tried to develop some sort of early international law system. And here is another interesting element. That once countries, or in this case empire, are weak, they're trying to establish rules, because anarchy and the lack of the rules usually favors those who are the most powerful. Therefore, Byzantine Empire at that time tried to develop some sort of international legal system. Another highlight was that Byzantine Empire was they were early realists in the Morgenthau theories. And here is one quote from one of the leading Byzantine historians at that time, John Kinamos. They call him early Machiavelli. And then, as you can see, you can find some of the traces of Machiavelli's thinking. He said, since many and various matters led towards one end, victory, it is a matter of indifference which one uses to reach it. Therefore, at the end, the objective justifies any means, as Machiavelli later on developed in his writings. What were the tactics that they used? As we already mentioned, they used the divide and rule, divide et impera. They used bribery a lot. And I'm sure that they will be the first clients of the anti-corruption scandals today. And I'm afraid that they put the seeds into Western European culture for the later on development, still nowadays, of bribery and corruption. They use it extremely skillful, and you will see later on how it was done, how it was organized. They didn't like to fight wars because they didn't have enough military power. Therefore, they used proxies. When Bulgarians attacked them, they made alliance with Russia, and that Kiev. They attacked Bulgaria, and you had many examples. Constantinople was also a place where you can find many pretenders of the various foreign thrones, like more or less like London was in 20th century. Therefore, they maintained some sort of stable of pretenders to a foreign throne and used them diplomatically to put the pressure on the neighboring territories and tribes which were around Constantinople. I think you can get the atmosphere of the city, which is always fascinates me. That center with at that time 500,000 citizens, with Hagia Sophia, with big construction project, wonderful location, wonderful sunsets, and this cosmopolitan atmosphere from people all over Europe and the Middle East. As I indicated, they were very eclectic. They borrowed many things, and they didn't care about copyright. But in the same time, they introduced a few gradual innovations in diplomacy. First, they create so-called Bureau of Barbarians. Barbarians means people, foreign, uncivilized foreign people, mainly nomadic tribes from the Central Asia and the Balkans. And they created, one can call it Proto-Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bureau of Barbarians, which was managing continuously foreign relations with those tribes. As you will see, they were collecting a lot of information, organizing visits, organizing protocol and ceremonial aspects. They also introduced the first intelligence service, well-developed intelligence service. They had a network of agents in neighboring territories. And since they had to rely on diplomacy, on persuasion, they had to have a lot of information about developments in neighboring territories. They were basically collecting information about preferences, personalities of the local rulers, local tensions, fights, and there is we don't have time to quote it, but there is a very interesting collection, some sort of WikiLeaks of the 12th century, of the way how they were managing these neighboring territories by putting one rulers against others and using this type of technique. The third innovation is diplomatic reporting. For the first time in the history of diplomacy, we had regular written reports from Byzantine agents abroad, sent back to the Constantinople, processed by the Bureau of Barbarians, and then based on the analysis, instructions were sent back to the Byzantine agents abroad. It is more or less how diplomacy functions today. As you know, diplomatic reporting is the key of any diplomatic service. We saw it in the case of the WikiLeaks, how we had in a way X-ray of U.S. diplomacy by seeing the diplomatic reporting which were leaked by Assange. Therefore, they introduced first Ministry of Foreign Affairs, first Intelligence Service, and first diplomatic reporting. Elements of this existed in the past. If you can recall, in Amarna diplomacy, there were reports on the clay, but they were not regular. They were sent occasionally. What are the lessons that we can learn from the Byzantine Empire? First is really their great skill to manage time, and successful diplomacy requires consistent efforts over a long period of time. Anything in diplomacy, including social media, you cannot do things tomorrow. And this is in a way in contradiction to the main atmosphere, main spirit of our time, where this element of immediacy, element that you can do things now and here, is in a way taming our awareness of importance of time, awareness of planning, and making consistent efforts over a long period of time. Byzantine Empire, in spite of really limited military might and resources, including economic resources, lasted for 1,100 years. This is one of the most interesting and relevant lessons that we can learn from them. They were also very skillful in using time in tactical way, delaying, procrastinating deals. But I will send you this information in the follow-up to this seminar. The second element is centrality of information. They realize how important it is to have information, what is going on abroad. And the lesson for us is that we have to avoid information asymmetry, which is emerging nowadays with, for example, enormous power that internet providers have, or internet industry have, Google, Facebook, other players, and the rest of the players in the policy field. There is emerging information asymmetry. Byzantine used it very skillfully by basically controlling all neighboring tribes for 1,100 years by using their information superiority. The third point, and this was for me, besides the time management, probably the most fascinating, is the way how did they innovate. They innovated gradually. They tried the new techniques, they collected feedback, then they introduced it. And it's fascinating how innovation management, if we can use the term nowadays terminology, was mastered by Byzantine rulers. And we should learn it, especially in nowadays hype when it comes to e-diplomacy, social media, and other tools. And while they were innovating, using their tools, they kept always in mind what is the main purpose of diplomatic work. In their case, it was to maintain the Byzantine Empire. In spite of all odds or difficulties, they managed to do it over a very long period of time. What is the sort of impact of Byzantine Empire on our time? first of all, the Byzantine Empire had a very and long-lasting influence on diplomacy. All of these techniques, ministries of foreign affairs, reporting, spies and intelligence services, moved mainly via Venice, to some extent via Russia and Ottoman Empire to modern era. And if you analyze some of the pillars of diplomacy nowadays, you can find quite a few commonalities with the Byzantine time when it comes to all of these elements: Ministry of Foreign Affairs, reporting, soft power, use of the realist approach to international relations. Therefore, we can learn quite a lot from the way how they did it, as we indicated, through gradual innovation and improvement of diplomatic tools. Now, well, next week we will have our team will be diplomacy in Gutenberg era, but now I'm passing the floor to you for questions. I hope you will have some comments about especially relevance of Byzantine time to our time. Obviously, there is, I didn't mention, there is a negative connotation sometimes which is used for Byzantine Empire, which is associated for ethically questionable approaches, bribing, then using the lying, and they were accepting that the lying was justified if it leads to the maintenance of empire. We have the first question. I don't know if there were questions above. Here is from Diplo webinar. I don't know who is asking the question, but let me read it. Please type your question in the chat. Okay, this is all participants from the drop. Fine. Stefano Baldi, you mentioned innovate gradually, but today we are forced to innovate quickly. How could we introduce gradual innovation today? Well, Stefano, I think you have the answer. You have been innovating gradually, at least what I'm seeing from distance. For example, in the use of blogs in diplomacy. You started almost 2 years ago with a blog post. Then what you did, you paced the blogging. You have I'm really relying more and more on your blogs because of that element of the pace, time pace. I know that they will come at least once weekly. Therefore, it doesn't mean that we have to be slow. It doesn't mean that we have to introduce artificial delays. But when I say innovate gradually, and based on what they did, was that we have to be very careful where we introduce innovation, how to innovate, and how to read the feedback. Those are 3 elements. Therefore, it may be fast if there is a space to do it, but it shouldn't be fast by design, as it is currently promoted by, in a way, dominant discourse in modern society. Massimiliano, well, Byzantine legacy over to Venice, there were, as you know from the history, there were big competitors, especially after when the Crusaders started moving towards Byzantine till the very end of Byzantine. And Venice copied not only in diplomacy, but in other fields, quite a few techniques, especially governance techniques from the Byzantine Empire. They learned it hard way. In the first period of their encounters, Byzantine Empire, if you can use the term, made fools of the Venetians, Doge and the other dignitaries. And there is one famous telegram when one of the Byzantine Empire managed by procrastination to destroy the Venetian fleet by playing on diplomacy, receiving delegations, sending the plague virus to the Venetian cap. He wrote to Venetian Doge that basically Byzantine Empire said he didn't know that Venetians were so stupid. At the end, we know how it ended, but it was very difficult sort of interplay, and Venice took a lot when it comes to secrecy, negotiation, using merchants for information gathering, which was one of the techniques. But not only professional agents used it by Byzantine Empire, by missionaries, and this is another thing, they were basically using the religion and missionaries for some sort of soft power. Ginger, do the pre-Machiavellian Byzantine political maneuvers used by states now apply more to the business sector than state diplomacy. Transparency has become more important. Yes, yes, it applies. As you know now, business sector is a part of the diplomatic scene, and but governments are still using, if not secret, then translucent tools in negotiation. It is not possible to have everything in public. But there is one good question: how we can force business sector to be more transparent? Civil society and business sector, with reason, are asking governments to be more transparent. What about the way how business sector and civil society function? What about transparency of Transparency International or Amnesty International or big companies? This is an interesting question to be addressed. Stefan, a good point on the importance of feedback. Thank you. Giorgio, could you please tell us something more on trade diplomacy of the Byzantine Empire? Yes, as I just mentioned in the question, the legacy and the link between Byzantine and Venice, they use merchants a lot, and they borrowed it especially from Hittite Empire, from the ancient East diplomacy. And all Byzantine citizens were potential spies in one aspect of diplomatic activities. Therefore, on their return from their missions abroad, they had special debriefings at the Barbarian Bureau, which collected all information on the foreigners. Therefore, that was one aspect they were using for information gathering, and obviously they were using for the construction project, for investment in sense of bribery. Bribery came in various forms. Sometimes it was just gold. In other cases, it came in the form of the investment development project which Byzantine was doing, especially in the Balkans and the Central Asia. And you can imagine now, you can visualize that time you had such sophisticated city as Constantinople was, collecting all wisdom of the centuries from the ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and making really cosmopolitan and urban center. And around it, you had more or less nomadic tribes coming from the north, from the Balkans or the Central Asia. Persian Empire was more sophisticated. Therefore, they had to engage in many construction projects. They were developing their infrastructure. Usually, they had merchants together with missionaries going to the Balkans. Cyrilius and Methodius, who spread the Christianity among Slavs, for example, were basically missionaries and people who were using soft power to win hearts and minds of the nomadic tribes. Good. Well, Greek language was dominant. It was official language of Byzantine Empire. But even in Roman Empire, Greek language was used for a long time as official language. Later on, being suppressed by Latin. But even in the Roman Empire, there was a continuation between ancient Greece, Roman Empire, and Byzantine Empire. They had in the Barbarian Bureau, the biggest staff, like nowadays in the European Union in Brussels, was staff of translators and interpreters. Oh, my language is now becoming difficult. And they were understanding language of the nomadic tribes around the Byzantine Empire. In the embassies, delegations that were standing, they didn't have resident embassies or consul like ancient Greece had the proxenos network, the consuls that were based in the foreign territories. They were sending some sort of flying ambassadors on the long missions that sometimes lasted for 1 year. And the members of those delegations, which were dignitaries, Byzantine dignitaries, had to know local languages of nomadic tribes. You're welcome, Dean. Yeah, Ginger, we have sometimes to step back, and I think these historical exercises are useful. And that's a correct point. Why only civil society, business sector should ask governments for transparency? What about their transparency of their work? And that the situation is not very good on the transparency on the other side. Ginger, it was multi-stakeholder because they used the state officials. They had the official agents, state agents. They used a lot of posts on the border, for example, border towards Balkans. They didn't feel like comfortable. No, you couldn't have the ambassador to Bulgaria or to Serbia or whoever. Those people at that time, Slavs, were nomadic tribes. They were they had they were polytheists. Therefore they didn't. State officials didn't feel comfortable to go and to reside in the. Therefore, the first stakeholder were state officials. The second were the merchants and engineers who were developing projects. And third, and very important, were missionaries, like Cyrilius and Methodius, who were basically spreading Christianity in mainly in the Balkans, but also in Central Asia, to some extent in Asia Minor. And they were, in a way, first were opponents of the soft power. So those were the three main players. Stefano, I agree with Ginger. Earlier I sent a link to a poem by Cavafy, gives an interesting slant on Byzantine diplomacy. Great. Do you always find lovely links? And the Cavafy is definitely one of the persons who managed to keep, who had still understanding of the time of Byzantine, although he lived much later on in 20th century. Stefano Baldi, did they have any kind of diploma in Roman Empire in Byzantine Empire? Not necessarily. On the contrary, the Barbarian Bureau, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, made sure that the foreign dignitaries were kept in isolation. There is a funny anecdote when one of the, what is the name of the newly emerging state in Italy came to Constantinople, and they kept him basically in the house arrest, and he complained about the low quality of wine that Byzantine empires, their hosts served them. Therefore, they kept foreign dignitaries in complete isolation, like a visit to North Korea nowadays. They had an official protocol officer from the Barbarian Bureau who was escorting them in their official meetings. But the key meeting was audience with the emperor, with these mechanical lions which were roaring, and it looks now funny, but it was so impressive for the nomadic leaders of nomadic tribes at that time. How much was discomfort culturally and how much fear? Discomfort which prevented residents and ambassadors. You can now imagine, I don't know what could be today the center of the world. Well, before it was Rome, later on maybe Paris or London. This was really overwhelmingly the most important place in the world, the Constantinople nowadays, Istanbul. Therefore, it was something for nomads to visit the place, let alone to be received by emperor. Therefore, there was a mix of mainly fear and, well, obviously, one can discuss cultural differences, but nomadic tribes didn't have at that time culture developed in the sense that we understand the development of civilization. So what was happening in Constantinople was just out of any proportion for them. Yes. Fear and that element of sublime, something almost heavenly, which is happening in front of your eyes with the whole pyrotechnic and mechanical devices at the emperor's throne. Great. I'm quite enthusiastic about Byzantine diplomacy, as you can see from my presentation, because it can really instruct us a lot about our time. and we can learn a lot on what worked and what didn't work very well. Therefore, we have few more comments. Diplomats at that time did not have to care about public diplomacy, definitely, Stefano. Only protocol and negotiation. Is this correct? Well, to some extent, they had a public diplomacy by using soft power. Therefore, they were bringing sons and daughters of the local rulers to Constantinople. They were bringing aristocracy in making. They were extending the Christianity in the surrounding territories. So it was if we consider soft power and public diplomacy, they used the public diplomacy. Obviously, they relied heavily on protocol and ceremonies, and to some extent on negotiations, because they were preparing their interlocutors through soft power exercise, then through protocol when they came to Constantinople. All negotiations were conducted in Constantinople, and then they negotiated a deal which was always codified as international treaty. And they obeyed the international treaties. It was very interesting because they were not, as you can see, they didn't hold quite high ethical ground, but when it comes to treaties, they obeyed them. Massimiliano, like Stefano, I'm very much concerned by the extent to which it is possible to play with time effectively in today's diplomacy. In Byzantine time, you could find many ways to delay. Can you today? That's Massimo. This is the ultimate question, probably, for a zoom-out question for our exercise. Well, we tend to procrastinate, and as you can see, procrastination could be traced back. Even Aristotle wrote about procrastination. Do we use procrastination as a part of tactic, as just part of necessity? I personally procrastinate a lot without even awareness that I'm procrastinating, but pressure on time is huge. That's thing that we should reflect more on. I can make just a few comments. The more we are engaging in cyber world, the more the component of time is becoming important. There is a lot of focus on space because internet is overcoming space factor, but I think that we'll have to deal more with the time component of our existence, how to manage time on different levels, from our personal life to official life, and in this case, diplomatic tactic. And I don't have a ready-made answer. We'll have to discuss it. And in all the bureaucratic style, we will make the working group for discussing the importance of time in modern diplomacy. It's at least a good way to procrastinate. But I think you said the Byzantine didn't have a resident in Africa. No, they did have resident ambassadors. They had ambassadors that were standing in missions. They were like a roving ambassador or flying ambassador nowadays. No, Massimo is a great point. The time component is extremely important. Good. Great. Let me just summarize. It seems that we exhausted the main questions on our journey to evolution of diplomacy, which started in January with our early predecessors. We moved in February to ancient East, Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Hittites, and other Sumers and other players. Then in March, we covered the ancient Greece, not particularly well-developed phase of diplomacy, with open diplomacy, public diplomacy, rhetoric, soft power. And today we discuss Roman time with the main focus on Byzantine diplomacy, which could be considered as a point when all of these threads, various threads from ancient East, ancient Greece, Rome, came together and formed something which could be described as Byzantine diplomacy, with the characteristics that we discussed: use of information, use of diplomatic tactic, development of ministries of foreign affairs, archives, introduction of diplomatic reporting. And as you will see during our next webinar, this legacy continues mainly through Venice to the rest of the Europe, via Venice to the Italian Renaissance diplomacy to the rest of the Europe. And we can see quite a few techniques from Byzantine diplomacy in our modern diplomacy, including e-diplomacy. Thank you for your time, good questions, and good energy that I can feel from your offices, rooms, internet cafes, and places from which you were accessing the webinar. Have a nice morning, Dee. Dee is in the Caribbean. Most of you have a nice afternoon and a lovely weekend. Thank you, Massimo.